The booty, and we're going to be bringing you the action here from Eli Kassis versus Jacob Wilson, Dimir Rogues, Selesnya Blink. Mani, tell us a little bit about these decks as these players get their opening hands sorted out.
Hey, Ailey, absolutely. So Dimir Rogues, a deck that's fallen a bit out of favor earlier on in the format. It was considered one of the top decks, and now with some of the poor matchups that it has against Gruul Adventure specifically, we don't see it as much in the Rivals League. It is still the second most played deck, but in the MPL League, in the MPL League, it is the second most played deck. In the Rivals League, has actually fallen to third. Esper Doomfortold replacing it. This Selesnya Blink deck is a deck that is sort of trying to target Gruul Adventures, but one of the benefits is it also actually has a pretty decent Rogues matchup. One of the cards that is really powerful against Rogues is Wicked Wolf, which is a feature of this Selesnya Blink deck that we don't see in some of the other Yorion decks, like the Esper Doomed deck that is a bit weaker in this Rogues matchup. So I actually don't think Jacob has too poor of a shot here. The combination of Skyclave Apparition plus Wicked Wolf does a great job of keeping the Rogues deck in check a lot of the time.
So as we get things underway here, we've got a Gilded Goose down on the battlefield, 2 more in hand here for Jacob Wilson, and that Skyclave Apparition that you mentioned. This card has almost seemed to be an auto-include deck an auto-include card in most of the Blink decks, just because it's so good at getting rid of a threat permanently. Sure, you get an illusion back, but most of the time there's a follow-up for that illusion, either in a Glass Casket or the Wicked Wolf, like you mentioned. Also a really good Blink target for Jacob Wilson.
Yeah, it's not often that we see these cards like Fiend Hunter or Fairgrounds Warden that are kind of the predecessors to Skyclave Apparition actually replace the word creature with non-land permanent. And the fact that Skyclave Apparition as a 3-drop is just an answer to so many of the problem cards in the format, but not only temporarily, as it is formatted, it's a permanent answer that then replaces whatever it's stolen with a token, means that you can use it just without worry of really your opponent being able to answer it and get their card back. And it makes it just such a powerful variation of a design that we've seen in the past. And it's no surprise that it's seeing so much play in the standard format in these decks that are more mid-rangey and able to get more advantage out of its enters the battlefield ability.
So a pretty nasty turn there for Eli Kassis, getting 2 extra rogues in, doubling the triggers for the mill, and now the graveyard is at 8, turning on the +2/+1 effect of the Thieves Guild Enforcers and the Death Touch, with the Soaring Thought Thief. There we go. There's our mouthful card again.
It's back.
It's back, being dealt with though underneath the Skyclave Apparition, but still the mill plan is on. But this list, it's got several cards in it. So it's gonna have to get through there, as we are gonna see the Thieves Guild Enforcer and the Skyclave Apparition trading.
Yeah, notably these Selesnya Blink decks, while they are Yorion decks, they aren't Yorion decks. They're 60 cards, and they feature all 4 copies of Yorion in the main deck. So Jacob is at a normal deck size in terms of fighting the mill plan, but that's not even Jacob's biggest worry, because on the board right now, he's very far behind, and there's just not much happening in terms of his hand. This Trail of Crumbs will potentially be able to get him back into the game, but only if he has the time to actually get it online, which that Glass Casket draw should help with.
Yeah, certainly being able to get rid of that Thieves Guild Enforcer is going to be, problem number 1 to solve, as we do see it hit the battlefield. And the Goose down on the battlefield too, just blocking this Merfolk Windrobber, so stopping the further mill from happening there. And Glass Casket, getting rid of the Thieves Guild Enforcer, and just slowing down Eli's roll. But there is a Drown on the Lock, so that'll be able to counter the very powerful enchantment in this deck in Trail of Crumbs, as we see a block tendered here on the Gilded Goose and the Merfolk Windrobber.
Yeah, Eli really showing that he's not over prioritizing Gilded Goose as a blocker and going to hold on to this Drown in the Loch for exactly the next problem card Jacob plays, which is going to be this Trail of Crumbs. With that Gilded Goose already in play, there's no way that Eli can feel comfortable allowing this to resolve, as once that trail is resolved, Eli will no longer be able to keep up with Jacob on a one-to-one resource trade game plan because of how much card advantage Jacob would be able to produce because of the enchantment.
Oh yeah, and the Goose not summoning sick anymore, so able to activate straight away would have gotten the card, but recognizes just how powerful and how much that card can swing the matchup. Getting rid of it on the stack, so no chance for the Goose to do the thing it does with the food.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to just see Eli sacrifice the Wind Robber for a card now. As long as that Gilded Goose is in play, the 1/1 just isn't doing much.
No, and this Flood isn't helping Eli's cause either here. Unfortunately, not finding anything useful off of those Merfolk Wind Robbers. Now, Eli's list is quite interesting. I believe he's playing the version, obviously not running Lurrus as a companion, but the version with the Nighthawks and the Zareth Sands. So why do you think he chose this one over the Lurrus one, which just rose in popularity?
The Lurrus version of Rogues was continuing to rise in popularity as long as the primary deck they were worried about were the Yorion decks. Having that sort of recursion is really powerful for that version of the deck. Unfortunately, it's just so weak against the Gruul Adventures deck that we've seen the resurgence of popularity in Nighthawk Scavenger and Zerasan. Just the larger creatures that don't fall so easily to a stomp from Bone Crusher Giant, as well as having that ability to kind of fight on a resource level and life total level, is the way Rogues can actually have a fighting chance against Gruul. But we do still see a bit of a hybrid here, as the 4 copies of Into the Story that were popularized in that in the Lurrus version of the Rogues deck are still a mainstay here in Eli's version. So not actually cutting down on the card advantage that the other version of the deck had access to.
Well, now no answers in hand for this second copy of Trail of Crumbs, so the Goose is able to sacrifice a food, generate the mana to pay the 1, finds Elspeth Conquers Death, so that Zarasan in hand is going to be answered very, very swiftly if Eli deploys it here. And unfortunately, that Wind Robber was the only rogue that he would have had, been able to do the little switcheroo thingamajiggy with Zarasan. Almost like it's ninjutsu, correct? That's the ability?
Yeah, it's ninjutsu-esque, but only for rogues, which is more restrictive here.
Yeah. The rogue jitsu. Finding a Jwari Disruption? Will there be? No. So we'll still be able to pay for whatever is counted with that. So unlikely to find a target, but Zarasan is going to be blocked to prevent him from stealing anything out of the graveyard. This 2/2 is still doing a lot of work, though, just chipping in every turn that it can.
Yeah, Jacob literally could not block that Zerasan fast enough. And you see the choice from him to sacrifice the food for 3 life there, even though he's not able to get a card off of it because he lacked the mana to pay for Trail of Crumbs trigger. And the reason for that is right now, Jacob knows that he's firmly ahead. Eli's down to 1 card in hand, and Jacob has the answer to the only threat that Eli is presenting in Zerasan. So he wants to make sure to take the opportunity to pad his life total in case the game goes in a direction where he's not able to make some tempo positive plays. He does have this more heavy, sluggish hand in these 5 drops. So take the time to make sure that life total is not at a point where he could get threatened if the next few turns somehow go poorly for him.
So just a momentary pause here. As I do believe we're just reconnecting with one of our players. So taking a look at this board state as is, who do you think is in the lead at this point?
Jacob by a lot. the fact that Jacob already has 2 cards in hand to Eli's 1, the answer for the Zarazan and this Trail of Crumbs is still in play with a Gilded Goose to back it up. The combo of Trail and Goose are just so powerful because you have the option to just use Goose to draw a card. The mana you create from sacrificing the food you can use to pay for the Trail trigger, but also Goose is an engine for creating endless food. So as long as you have the mana and the time, this is quote unquote infinite card advantage. So it's something that when Eli is trying to fight a resource battle, but he doesn't have cards like Into the Story in hand, he's not able to keep up with what Jacob is doing.
Sure, as we here see the Vivian Monsters Advocate down on the battlefield, creating more creatures, buying the time that's needed to, find the big threats, find the Wicked Wolf, get to the Elspeth Conqueror's Death, and just dismantle whatever game plan Eli Kassis has. As here we're going to see Jwari Disruption fired off on a not so exciting Gilded Goose, but the only thing that he can hit, unfortunately, with it. Or does he fire it off? That is the question.
Eli is considering, he's essentially trading this Jwari Disruption for a card from Jacob. Jacob is always going to pay the mana to get the other Goose into play, as it will replace the food that he's paying. But this means that Jacob is drawing 1 less card this turn from his Trail of Crumbs trigger. And Eli believes that this is the most value he's going to get from that Jwari Disruption this late into the game. And he really just, it's showing how comfortable Jacob feels in this position that he's willing to leave the Zarazan in play and just happily chump it for another turn.
Yeah. So Heartless Act having to kill the Gilded Goose, as there is a counter on this beast. So that's going to be on chump duty now for Jacob Wilson, as the 2/2 heads towards Vivian and tries to deal with that threat on the battlefield. But we do know that there is a second Vivian in the wings, as we're now able to cast this Wicked Wolf and get rid of Zarazan. Or actually, no, we're going to go for the 2/2 first and foremost, and then be on blocking duty for Zarazan with the food as backup.
Yeah, Jacob is just past the point of caring about removing the Zarazan at all. He realizes that as long as he just keeps this engine churning, Eli is just in a horrendous spot. And with a chump blocker and Wicked Wolf just fully putting the Zarazan in check, Jacob is essentially just tightening the door around Eli and just making sure that there's no window for Eli to get back into this game.
Yeah, now he's even disincentivized to attack here, knowing that the Wicked Wolf is just sitting there waiting. Maria's Call drawn off the top of the library. There's another copy of Trail of Crumbs going, and now you got to think it's just a matter of time before Eli Kassis, calls it a game, and we head to game number 2 here as Maria's Call's fired off. We create 2 angels and indestructible creatures. Will we see a swing here? Or are we just going to sit back? I mean, why not, right?
Why not?
Why not? Let's get him for 3.
Know that Eli can't block the wolf, so he may just take the opportunity to block the 3/3, but it's indestructible, so it doesn't matter, and it allows your wolf to get through without having to actually sacrifice a food. And yeah, this is Jacob just saying that I do not care about anything that could be in your hand. I'm going to tap out for my expensive finisher because I know that this game is going to be mine in a matter of turns.
Yeah. Another Zarazan off the top of the library, and this is looking very dire indeed for Eli Kassis as Jacob Wilson just continues to push the advantage here. Forest off the top. Here comes a Wicked Wolf off the top, and another Wicked Wolf on the top of the library as well. So now we can just move everything out the way, swinging for a big old chunk of damage. This is not looking good here at all for Eli.
Yeah, fortunately for Eli, he does have the second Zarazan. So what Jacob is going to view as potential lethal here by playing the second wolf and killing the Thieves Guild Enforcer will actually be thwarted by that second Zarazan. But, it's a temporary reprieve with no cards in hand. Eli is still going to be in a rough position, but he's not going to be dead, right?
just a little dead, I guess, if we're going in degrees of comparison here, as the second Zarazan enters the battlefield before the Thieves Guild Enforcer dies. 18 cards left in the library. Vivian plussing, making yet another creature and swinging in with the Angels in the Sky.
And this is interesting because Eli prioritized milling 2 more cards from Jacob's deck over holding that Zerasan as a surprise to try to come down as a surprise blocker and eat one of these attackers, which led Jacob to not attack. But as it stands, it just doesn't matter in the slightest.
Elspeth Conquers Death coming down, going to remove this blocker. A timely into the story, but nothing found off the top, so we're going to see a concession there from Eli Kassis. Jacob Wilson picks up the first game, and we're going to sideboarding. But before we check out the sideboarding, my friends, we are going to take a very quick break, so don't go anywhere. When we come back, plenty more from round 3. Welcome back to coverage here of the MTG League weekend. Eli Kassis, Jacob Wilson, ready to rock and roll in game number 2. Jacob Wilson picking up the first victory with Selesnya Blink, just overpowering the pack of wolves. And take a look at the opening hands here. A little bit of a clunky one, but we're going to keep it. 2 Yorion Sky Nomad in hand with 2 Scavenging Ooze and the Wicked Wolf.
Yeah, not the best hand from Jacob Wilson. Scavenging Ooze certainly powerful against this Rogues deck, not only because it's able to disrupt some of the graveyard shenanigans happening on the Rogue side with cards like Call of the Death Dweller that is a 1 of in the main deck, but also able to just keep your own graveyard size in check, making it quite a powerful creature for a 2-mana investment in the matchup. And we skipped over sideboarding there, but for Eli's sideboard, there isn't much that he has going on in terms of preparing specifically for this matchup. There is copies of Mystical Dispute that he did choose to bring in just to have some answers against the more clunky, expensive cards that the Green-White Blink deck is featuring, and there are 3 copies of Shark Typhoon that he may have brought in, but overall Eli's sideboard is very much tuned for some of the other Rogue and Gruul decks in the format. While for Jacob, his deck gets significantly better post-board, having access to those Scavenging Oozes, having access to 2 copies of Chainweb Arachneer, which was at some point considered the best answer against this Rogues deck. Since then, we've seen some of the Gruul decks move more in the direction of a card like Ox of Agonis as their escape creature of choice, but for Selesnya, Chainweb Arachneer remains on top.
So Eli Kassis just keeping everything that Jacob Wilson's trying to do in check with a variety of removal spells, Drown in the Lock, countering key cards, and Wicked Wolf coming down now just to get rid of that Soaring Thought Thief. But we still have a 3-2 with Death Touch that this wolf does not want to have anything to do with. No land, though. Struggling on land.
You see Eli just kind of sadly mousing over the cards in his hand, knowing that he can't really cast any of them. And if Eli's not able to draw the 3rd land here, this is where the game will fall away from him, as another counterspell will do the same job. The big thing for Eli is Jacob should not be allowed to resolve this Trail of Crumbs. Once Trail of Crumbs resolves, Eli can more or less say goodbye to this game, as he will be trying to catch up while Jacob is pushing further and further ahead, and that's just not a winning game plan as the Rogues player. You're someone that wants to be pushing the tempo, and you're banking on getting ahead on the board and then using the cards in your hand to cement that lead, and that's not the game plan that Eli's able to play in this game.
It's all a very reactive game plan, as we do find the 3rd land and are able to fight off something with this Mystical Dispute. Nothing coming down this turn, though. Miria's Call going to be played as a land. Oh, wait, we will see Yorion Sky Nomad, but as soon as it hits the stack, we're going to see this Mystical Dispute fired off, preventing the Sky Nomad from being on the battlefield.
Notably a blue card in the Selesnya deck, though, with Eli having drawn the third land, it didn't make much of a difference that was the case. Fourth land there for Eli is the start of the potential comeback.
Oh yes, into the story, being able to draw 4 cards for 4 mana seems pretty good. As we will see this Wicked Wolf swing in for 3 points of damage, Scavenging Ooze to follow up.
I believe that's the third of 4 oozes being drawn for Jacob. One of the main 3 more came in after sideboard. So now not able to control his graveyard size in a meaningful manner this turn, but having the ooze in play will prove beneficial going forward throughout the game.
Definitely so, as we draw 4 cards there. Another land, Jwari Disruption, Soaring Thought Thief, Thieves Guild Enforcer, an Extinction Event, which will come in handy against this battlefield. What's one way to kill something that's indestructible? Well, you see, you exile it. As, that'll likely be the plan here for the Wicked Wolf and company. So before the things get exiled, we're going to go munching on a graveyard here. Exiling cards from Eli Kassis' graveyard just in case of a recursion spell like a Nagadeem's Awakening or the Call of the Death Dweller, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and this game is just highlighting the power of Into the Story and why it's the direction that these rogue decks have chosen to move in. 4 mana for 4 cards in Standard is a pretty ridiculous rate in terms of value. And against a deck like the Selesnya Blink, if you're able to leverage that card draw into a board wipe to keep their pressure in check, that may give you all the time you need to turn the game around.
So Yorion Sky Nomad on the battlefield now, blinking the Goose away, creating another food token, and then down comes the Thieves Guild Enforcer, swinging in here. Going to keep chipping away at the life total of Jacob Wilson, who's now at 9.
Yeah, and even more important than his life total here, Jacob eyeing his graveyard, thinking about Zerasan. How bad would this be for me? As with, I believe, the full 4 copies of Zerasan in Eli's deck, just 3. That has to be something at the front of Jacob's mind that if Eli is making this attack, I need to be aware of what I could potentially be giving up.
Yeah. And that's one area where the Scavenging Ooze is also very good, not just keeping the graveyard size in check, but also, getting your biggest threats out of the graveyard so Zerasan can't steal it. As we see the Thieves Guild Enforcer dealt with, and the Chainwhip Arachneer down on the battlefield.
Yeah, I believe Jacob is just going to play it safe and hold the Yorion back. After this turn, he'll feel quite safe in his position, as now the Arachneer would be online. If Eli attacks at any point to put it in the graveyard, that's when Jacob can start exiling the problem cards in his own graveyard, keep his graveyard size in check, and start removing creatures from Eli's side of the board.
Yeah. Soul Guide Lantern's a bit of an awkward draw in this spot, because you have a Zerasan, you want to steal out the graveyard.
It's awkward and it isn't, because now if Eli is able to bait Jacob into putting this Arachneer in the graveyard at any point without being able to escape it, that gives Eli the window to permanently get rid of the most problematic card in Jacob's deck currently for the matchup.
Okay. Glass Casket's lining up down here on Jacob's side of the battlefield as Eli Kassis is just trying to find a way to get one of these creatures to stick. Jacob's doing a really good job here of just managing all the threats, even without a hand, I should say. He's just managing to mitigate all of these threats.
Yeah, and you see Jacob now considering attacking the opposite of the line that he kind of committed to last turn, because he has this Arachneer to chump. But because of that Soul Guide Lantern draw, he'll actually get heavily punished for this if he attacks with either creature, as now Eli can force the chump with the Arachneer next turn by playing the Zerasan, and then playing that Soul Guide Lantern to get rid of the Arachneer. So Jacob faltering in terms of the line that he chose to commit to, going with it one turn and then flipping it around the next turn, meaning that now he's in a position where Eli is able to get rid of this Chainweb Arachneer and continue putting pressure on, and Jacob has to hope he finds an answer to Zerasan in this turn window, or Eli might just be able to stabilize this game at 3 life.
Well, here we go. Zerasan swinging in for 5. Soaring Thought Thief trigger on the stack. 2 more cards into the bin. And the Chainweb Arachneer forced to chump block here. So no card for Zerasan to steal. Followed up by the Soul Guide Lantern. And goodbye, Graveyard. Or at least Chainweb Arachneer for now.
Yeah, that's the big upside for Eli, is having the choice to not sacrifice the lantern, being able to just get the one important card in the graveyard in the Arachneer means that he's now in a position where he's got this Yorion covered potentially, and yeah, not even interested in getting rid of the rest of the graveyard, just cash the lantern in for a card.
So still has some window shopping to do then with Zerasan, as we'll see another attack here. And Yorion Sky Nomad. Is there ever a situation where Jacob is happy to give up a card? Or
not with Vivien Monsters Advocate in your graveyard. Giving Dimir Rogues access to Vivien to not only produce a card every turn. Yeah, lucky for Eli that Mystical Dispute came off the top just in time to be able to answer this Yorion, as otherwise this game may have swung around again.
Oh, yes. So this Soaring Thought Thief just going to keep chipping away, dealing 2 points of damage, taking Jacob down to 8 now. Thieves Guild Enforcer as well as Jawari Disruption in hand at the ready. A Goose can get in the way, though, for a turn. And just possibly generate some more food.
Yeah, Goose can certainly buy Jacob time, but he's desperately in need of one of those big problem cards like a Wicked Wolf to try to stabilize this board. It would be great. I think we've seen 2 wolves get milled so far, so I would guess that there's 2 remaining in the deck, but unfortunately we have no actual way of checking. Yeah, so 23 cards left in the library. We saw another Trail of Crumbs go down. That would have been a great pickup for Jacob to have, especially with this Goose down on the battlefield. Ooh, swinging in here for 6 now. Do we jump in the way, or are we just happy to let that damage through and sacrifice a food token to pad the life total? Yeah, I would guess we're going to gain 6 life here. Jacob going back to the 8 he was before that attack and hoping to draw a relevant card, which just isn't there. Oh, hello. All right, there's a Chainweb Arachneer. Yeah, we're happy to keep that on top of the library. Card. Please do mill that. But as you said, that is also a card, and that is an into the story into a Drown in the Loch. So this Chainweb Arachneer is going to be answered. Goose, are you taking one for the team here, my friend? Let's find out. I would guess, given what Jacob has, he'll feel safe to not block for another turn. He'll make a food on his end step and just gain another 6 would be my best guess. And just keep the Goose alive for just a little bit more value the next turn. You're doing a good job there, Goose. Keep it up. Down to 2 goes Jacob Wilson. End step, generate a food token. Sacrifice both. Back up to 8. Yeah, the Drown in the Loch is doing a great job of keeping things secure for Eli here, now fully feeling like he is ahead and just needs to make sure that he's not able to put the shields down for a moment, allow something like an Arachnia resolve, and fully flip this game around. And one answer should probably be enough given the amount of mana Jacob has. There's not many spells that he can double cast here.
Unfortunately, just 1 mana short of double casting the Chainweb Arachnia. Gonna go for the most threatening cards in the graveyard, though, in case of a Zareth San.
Yeah, do what he can, and Jacob continues to be alive here. So even if this Drown in the Loch does come out, which it has to, Jacob still has a shot. If Eli doesn't draw anything relevant, Jacob can block the Thieves Guild Enforcer, or even just let the attack through and gain 3 life and continue to remain alive going into one more turn to bring the Arachnia back again.
Yeah, so the onus now on Eli to continue finding answers. Give the library an old shuffle with the Fabled Passage being cracked. Looks like Shark Typhoon that we saw shuffled away with that Fabled Passage. So now Soaring Thought Thief and the Thieves Guild Enforcer in once again. There goes another Wicked Wolf into the graveyard. Food sacrifice back up to 8. You do hate to see it. But we found another chump blocker in another Goose. Chainweb Arachnia first and foremost, though. Gonna go digging through the library. Through the graveyard. And get rid of the threatiest threats in case of a Zareth San. And
you really see how Jacob is prioritizing his graveyard. The first things he immediately goes to, Vivian Monster's Advocate, Trail of Crumbs. These are cards that he is not willing to let Eli have. After that, it's just get rid of some lands. I'm not able to get rid of every good card in my graveyard, but those are the ones that I need gone. Yeah.
And things are looking really dicey here for Jacob, but he somehow managed to stabilize here with a respectable threat on the battlefield. Ooh, but Zareth San comes off the top of the library. This Thieves Guild Enforcer has to be blocked. Like, you know, there's no two ways about it. But is there any world where it's let through? No, we're just going to go straight through to the end step there, make a food token, and we're waiting for Zareth San to make his arrival. Oh, and Maria's Call. Well, now, that's going to throw a pickle in the works for sure. Please attack with the geese. Just assert dominance.
And this is why we really see these Selesnya and Yorion decks choose to have Emeria's Call as their endgame finisher. The fact that a land, a card that you can play at any point in the game for mana, can be your finisher, and such a powerful finisher in that, just creating 2 flyers, 4/4 flyers that are able to pressure life total so quickly, means that just like that, this game can swing around in just one draw, and Eli is alive by having the Zareth San as a chumper, but suddenly he's back in top deck mode in a game that looked pretty firmly in his favor for a while.
Yeah, but just again, showing the power of all these little food-generating geese. Sure, we don't have the Trail of Crumbs down here, but these guys have done so well to keep Jacob Wilson in a game that would have otherwise been over already. Eliminate, also drawn at the top, keeps Eli Kassis alive, being able to kill one of these Angel Warriors. A forest off the top of the library here for Jacob Wilson.
Yeah, when Escape was previewed as a mechanic, nobody really knew how much relevance some of the worst Escape cards were going to have in constructed formats. Escape was a mechanic that everybody really heralded in Limited because repeated card advantage is quite powerful when it comes to Limited, but in constructed, you don't really know. Your graveyard is a resource a lot of times, and it's a limited resource. You're not going to be escaping too often, so we really saw Escape being saved for the premium escape creatures, the Uros and the Croxes. But with the rise of the Rogues deck, what we've also seen is a rise of playability in other escape creatures, just because they give you the fodder for your graveyard, and suddenly something like Chainweb Arachnia is just a premium card in a matchup, which isn't something I ever thought would happen in Standard.
Do or die time for Eli Kassis, and it is die time indeed as Jacob Wilson picks up a clean 2-0 victory with Selesnya Blink. So Great matchup there for the Blink player. Unfortunately, Rogues not getting it done, but a great matchup nonetheless. We're going to go to a very short break, and then we'll be back as soon as possible.
This is the weakness, of course, of ramp decks, is that they are vulnerable to hard counters, where sometimes the control player just says, sure, like, ramp all you want. I'm just going to counter the stuff that actually matters. And I think that's the case here as well.
Yeah,
it's a couple of lands off the top for Autumn Burchett, and William Huey Jensen has found the victory here in incredible fashion. This was just an awesome game to watch from both perspectives. Both players playing at such a high level. Ultimately, though, it's a Hall of Famer, William Huey Jensen, who takes down the match.
Unreal game for
there from both sides, Cedric. What a treat to get a chance to watch that game. Isn't it this time of the game when
I would be playing with my dog if I had one right now, given how this... Oh, hold on.
Oh, no.
I can't win, but I have an idea.
What is Brad doing?
Okay.
Oh, no. I do not like it when Brad rubs his hands together like that. He's leaving.
Yeah. Okay, I like it.
Oh, is he going to barge into BBD's room?
I'm thinking easy disconnect the Wi-Fi.
Look at BBD.
Yeah, he has no idea.
He's like, what is going on?
Okay.
And remember, Brad's on 0 timeouts here. Like, if he times down, he's going to try to make the play for him. It was his only out. Oh, he's going for the concede button. And there's the big handshake. Brian Branduin picks up the win here. Brad thinking outside the box.
And here's the Shark Typhoon. Now, is this is just as much of a problem for Ken here, because Shota has exactly the play we talked about, right?
Exactly. Now we got Brazen Bar as another option. Brazen Bar, Heartless Act,
even better
both do the same thing. Yeah, you get a little bit of value as well. And now we're going to see that Shark Typhoon with a counterspell backup.
What's up, friends? Welcome back to coverage of MTG League Weekend. We're watching the Rivals League players play today. MPL will be up tomorrow, and we've got more magic here from round number 3. Let's find out who we're going to watch here. Game number 3 between these two players, Matias Leverato versus Frederico Bastos. Matias Leverato, of course, a mythic champion. Frederico Bastos, a long time Portuguese player, 2 Pro Tour top 8s to his name. Gruel Adventures versus Dimir Rogues. Let's find out what happens. Throwing it down to Ailey Loney.
Thank you very much, Maria. All right, we're ready to rock and roll here. It is game number 3 between these players. And we're rocking the Lurus Rogues here. So a slightly different variant than what we saw in the previous game here, Mani. Talk us through this deck and what it's looking to do.
Yeah, this Lurus Rogues is very much a more card advantage oriented version of Rogues. It does feature the full 4 copies of Into the Story, but it's trying to power them out using 4 copies of Ruin Crab. I expect we've seen the Ruin Crabs boarded out in this matchup, but you're really trying to get an edge by turning your cards in the graveyard matter cards on as soon as possible, using the power of Ruin Crab. And it also features Lurus because you've trimmed your deck down a lot, so you get to have the powerful companion and just make sure that you're continuously recurring your cheaper threats and putting pressure on your opponent. It's a good build of Rose. It was a very popular build of Rose, but it's slightly fallen out of favor these days just because of the prevalence of Gruul and how irrelevant those Ruin Crabs can be in the matchup.
All right, speaking of Gruul, let's talk about Matias Leverato's build. I see in the main deck configuration, he's still running the Stonecoil Serpent as well as the Gem Razor, so perhaps a nod there to the power of the artifacts and enchantments in the format at the moment?
Yeah, specifically, I would guess that this is a nod to the Gruul Mirror itself. Just having main deck answers for Embercleave and the Great Henge can really give you an edge. And I think that may be why we see Matias opt for a bit of an older build of Gruul, but still super powerful and instead just forming itself around the metagame that he expects to face.
And here we see one of the powerful cards against the mill players is Ox of Agonis. Not something you really want in hand. It's rather something you'd like to see go to the graveyard as soon as possible. As both players just keeping each other in check, Lurus of the Dream Den brought to hand, and Scavenging Ooze down on the battlefield. able to start munching on a graveyard.
Yeah, I think the thing you want to see the least the turn you put your Lurrus into hand is a Scavenging Ooze coming out on the other side of the battlefield, immediately exiling the only card you can get back with Lurrus from your graveyard, and suddenly putting you in a position where you don't even want to play the Lurrus and put it in a position where it could be potentially exposed.
Yeah, there's a couple cards in Standard where it's just like, I don't want to play this on an empty battlefield. Lurrus being one of them. Edgewall Innkeeper is another one. And, well, not an empty battlefield per se, but the Scavenging Ooze you certainly want on the battlefield with a graveyard to get chomping on. Bonecrusher Giant, going to stomp to the face.
Yeah, it's awkward for Leverato just because Bastos has really drawn a answer-heavy draw with these Heartless Acts, and from Leverato's side, if Bastos isn't playing creatures, that's the only thing he can assume are in Bastos's hand are lands, removal spells, and cards that he can't cast like into the story. Any creatures would have already been gotten cast. So the way Leverato is looking at it, if he plays one of these creatures, he's just playing into Bastos's game plan, and he wants to keep his graveyard size as small as possible right now because he doesn't want Bastos to be able to fire off a cheaper into the story. So we just see a very patient game plan from Matthias, just understanding that right now this isn't quite a tempo game. He's not going to be putting pressure on because any creature he plays is very likely to get removed.
Mm-hmm. Very patient indeed, as we'll see the second stomp now. Go straight to face. Drown in the Lock is available to counter it, but decides not to. We're going to hold on to that for one of the bigger threats in Matthias's deck. Bonecrusher Giant coming on down. It's always painful removing Bonecrusher Giant because of its second bit of text there. But beats taking 4 damage to the face.
Yeah, really the lesser of two evils there for Federico Bastos. And I'd love to know what Leverato's graveyard size is.
It's not 5, I can tell you that.
Yeah, based on Bastos' reaction here of it being 7 lands in play for him and not having enough cards in his opponent's graveyard to drown the lock this Vivian, not 5 seems correct.
Really unfortunate there, but now talk about getting cards into the graveyard. Here comes the Ruin Crab with a Fabled Passage backup, so that's going to be plenty cards to now deal with any further threats with 2 copies of Drown in the Lock drawn off that into the story. There is a Fire Prophecy waiting to just get rid of this Ruin Crab, but it's going to get the job done here and make resolving anything quite a pain in the derriere for our dear Matthias Leverato, as Bloodchief's Thirst takes care of Vivian.
Yeah, with that into the story resolved, Federico Bastos is now fully feeling like his deck's game plan is functioning now. He's got cards in the graveyard. These Drown in the Locks are more or less hard counters at this point, and he has answers to the creatures his opponent plays. And one of the really big cards that this specific build of Rogues tends to play is Lull Mage's Domination, a card that, because you're milling your opponent aggressively, you can ensure that it's on quite regularly, and it can be a very powerful tempo swing for stealing an opponent's creature and having it as a blocker the next turn.
All right, so in this situation, Drown in the Lock can either counter or kill the Bonecrusher Giant, but is this also a target for Lull Mage's Domination when the turn comes around?
Yeah, I would guess that from Bastos' point of view, he'd rather save Drown in the Locks for counter spells on slightly more relevant permanent types, and perhaps just Lull Mage's Domination, this Bonecrusher Giant, be happy to trade it off for that token should the time come.
Soaring Thought Thief off the top, but it's going to be Lull Mage's Domination. Targeting the Bonecrusher Giant, takes another 2 points of damage. And more importantly, takes the relevant threat. Fire Prophecy's lighting up, going like, I can kill that.
Yeah, if Matthias's plan was to fire Prophecy, that Bone Crusher Giant, he did have the option to do it in response to the domination, just to save himself 2 life. But by doing so, he would give more information to Bastos, which would allow Bastos to make different decisions with sorcery speed. So he just says that I'm a 21, I can afford to take 2 life should I choose to remove this giant on this turn cycle. I don't need to give Bastos more options by allowing him to do more things with sorcery speed.
Heartless Act can't target that, unfortunately, my friend. Reach is a counter, thanks to Vivian. Fire Prophecy is going to take care of the Bone Crusher Giant. Sending back the other Fire Prophecy, perhaps. He's considering digging further into his library as Matthias Leverato.
Yeah, and I'm not sure digging is the goal here for Matthias as much as it is just trying to empty his hand, as the game plan is quickly becoming resolve Oxyvagonus for Matthias, meaning I wouldn't be surprised to see him cast it this turn. The only worry is that Luris sitting in Frederico's hand and Matthias feeling like he needs an answer to it. But as long as Matthias is not getting an escape creature going, things are going to be very difficult for him. So I think this is where he may need to prioritize casting Ox. Though something that I've noticed with Matthias Leverato is he's a very patient player. He typically tends to take his time, not overextend resources, and just make sure to get the most out of every card. And perhaps that may be the reason we see him sit back and not cast this Ox this turn.
I do love watching his reaction sometimes as he's thinking through his plays and his different lines. So let's see what he goes for here. If it's going to be the Oxyvagonus, he's going to lose the Fire Prophecy, but could potentially draw a second Fire Prophecy or something else to deal with Lura. So a bit of a gamble here as he makes his decision.
The big question will be if Federico Bastos will actually allow the Oxyvagonus to resolve. The fact that Fire Prophecy is in Matthias's hand isn't something that Federico knows about, though. If Matthias chooses to cast this Ox, Federico will ask himself, why did he think so long about this? That card that is remaining in hand must be something that is important to Matthias if he's tanking about whether he wants to discard it or not. But 3 new cards should also be pretty scary from Federico's point of view. So you can't really afford to let this Ox resolve, but Federico is still thinking about it.
Yeah, this is a very tough point to be in, or position to be in for Federico, as you see him agonizing over this Oxyvagonus. Drown in the Lock is going to be fired off, though, and into the graveyard it goes. And very soon, it's going to start munching on that graveyard of Matthias Leverato. Into the story drawn, though. That's a big, big pickup. You want to fire this off before this Ox starts chomping on that graveyard. So let's see what we find. Perfect Windrobber, Soaring Thought Thief, and 2 lands for Federico.
Yeah, not the best into the story, but this now allows Federico to start cobbling together a bit of a game plan. Could cast Merfolk Windrobber here by using that Fabled Passage and still have 2 2-mana spells up. And the big thing here is Oxyvagonus trying to counter it the next time it tries to come down. It won't be a permanent answer, but 8 cards is a lot to remove for Matthias Leverato. So there's only so many times that he's able to get that escape cost paid until the game plan slows down for him.
So a full hand versus a Fire Prophecy. An Oxyvagonus waiting patiently, as Matthias Leverato has been this entire game. Like you said, just exercising patience, being very deliberate about his plays, thinking 3 or 4 turns ahead even, perhaps.
Yeah, this is a position where Matthias is ahead on board, but certainly feels behind in terms of cards in hand. When your opponent's already resolved 2 copies of Into the Story, you can't really feel like you're advantaged unless you're really putting pressure on their life total. And that's just something that Matthias is not doing right now. This 3/3 is able to get blocked, and the Merfolk Windrobber can just sacrifice for a card. So Matthias needs more than he currently is presenting.
Hoping that this Oxyvagonus resolves and gives him more than he currently has in hand. So again, this Fire Prophecy at the risk of being sent away as we see Matthias going through the graveyard, 13 cards in hand, 13 cards in the graveyard, being munched on by this Ox. It's gonna resolve.
Yeah, Matthias has the option with the Ox trigger on the stack now to cast this Fire Prophecy just to get rid of this Wind Robber as a blocker. Even if Frederico wanted to sacrifice it before, he can't anymore because the cards are gone from the graveyard because of the Ox escape. So now Frederico is going to lose this Wind Robber, and there's not much he can do about it short of just countering Fire Prophecy with Drown in the Lock, which is the worst place Matthias Frederico can find himself.
Shatterskull smashing in a Bone Crusher Giant found alongside a forest off of the Ox of Agonis escape. And importantly, now we're able to apply some pressure on the life total here of Frederico.
Yeah, and Frederico just looking at this Heartless Act in hand and just wondering, how can this creature deck present so many creatures that are so good against my removal spell? Ox of Agonis getting escaped with a counter on it, the tokens from Vivian Monster's Advocate all coming in with some kind of counter on them, meaning that Frederico is just continuously put in such a difficult position.
Yeah, certainly having all of his answers checked to the door. As a Soaring Thought Thief comes down, ×2. And a Blood Chief's Thirst. Now that's an answer that'll get rid of this Ox of Agonis, at least for a little while.
Yeah, looks like Frederico may finally have to pull the trigger on this Lurrus. I don't know what is exactly in his graveyard, but having access to all the cards he's played so far this game means that he may be able to get back another Thieves Guild Enforcer. But yeah, just does not really want to be putting more cards in his opponent's graveyard while there's an Ox in play that he still has to deal with.
And there's another Ox as well, so things are not looking super good here. We have a Merfolk Wind Robber as well as the Ruin Crab in the graveyard that can be cast with the Lurrus. So Drown in the Lock is an answer to the Ox, so long as the other Ox doesn't go munching on the graveyard.
Yeah,
We got
and
Blood Chief's
part of
Thirst
the
as well.
problem for Frederico is escape. Exiling cards for escape is a cost. So it's not something that he can really respond to. As soon as Matthias chooses to escape the Ox, Frederico has lost his window to cast Drown in the Lock for whatever the number of cards in the graveyard was before. And that's something that really puts Frederico in an awkward position where the deck that he's playing, the Rogues deck, wants to be reactive, but the cards that he's playing against take that ability away from him. He has to be proactive with his cards if he wants to get good uses out of them.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we have answers to some of the creatures on the battlefield here for Matthias Leverato as well. So Frederico's really got to start applying pressure here. Goes for the token, leaves the Ox of Agonis on the battlefield. Drown in the Lock is going to be nullified here, essentially, with the Ox of Agonis escape. But let's see what the sequence is here for Matthias. If he's going to go straight for the Lurrus with a Stomp. Does exactly that. Knowing that the Ox is coming, Drown in the Lock is going to be fired off here to protect Lurrus. And now Frederico has to deal with 2 potential Oxen on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think from Matthias's point of view, it is tempting to try to answer this Lurrus using this Shatterskull smashing. But honestly, I would personally just play it as a land, play this Kazandu Mammoth, and bring back the other Ox, get rid of essentially your entire graveyard, and just feel like you're in a position where, yeah, Frederico has some creatures in play, but what exactly are they doing?
That is true, as Shatterskull Smashing now gets rid of Lurrus and the Merfolk Wind Robber. So no more cards from the graveyard for you there, dear little kitty cat. But still, how do we deal with this Ox? Sure, we can trade them for the Soaring Thought Thief. Is that a consideration here?
It's a consideration. You're not really doing much with these double thought thieves. You're not pressuring your opponent's life total, and you've just gotten to a point where taking 5 down to 1 is such a risky position for the Rogues deck, considering all of your cards in hand are essentially dead right now.
Yeah. Heartless Act doesn't really pull its weight so much anymore against these Gruul decks. Especially not with all the escape counters and other sorts of counters being put on these creatures. Rune Crab off the top of the library. We're going to cycle away this Triumph, try and find something a little bit more impactful. There's a Thieves Guild Enforcer, so that can jump in the way of one of these Ox.
Yeah, and Ruin Crab, not even a card that you really want to trigger right now, because you don't want to enable Matthias to have another potential escape of the Oxyvagonus. The more escapes you allow this Gruul deck to have, the harder it's going to be for you to win the game as this Dimir Rogues player from this position.
Well, yeah, I mean, almost at the point of being able to escape both Ox there with 15 cards in the graveyard, 26 cards left in the library. Here comes Kazandu Mammoth. Going to fire off our Edgewall Innkeeper and then escape one of these oxen from the graveyard. All right, let's see what we get this time. Matthias also wants to be careful not to, inadvertently mill himself, but still with 26 cards, he's looking all right here in terms of wrapping up this game before the deck size becomes an issue.
That's really the fine line that Matthias is towing by playing this Ox game plan, is making sure not to mill himself too low while leveraging the cards he has for pressure. And so far, I think he's just done a fantastic job. There's no real worry about getting milled out yet. If Frederico was holding something like a Fabled Passage and 2 Ruined Crabs with another passage in play, maybe that large explosive burst of mill could come out. But as the game stands, that's just not really something that Matthias needs to realistically be worried about.
Even getting another card off of the Lovestruck Beast here, an Edgewall Innkeeper, the Forest off the top, and Thieves Guild Enforcer on the end step is going to come down. Or excuse me, on the attack step is going to come down and just start milling once again. Drown in the Lock, Heartless Act, and Ruin Crab. Can these get the job done here for Frederico Bastos? Playing Dimir Rogues against Matthias Leverato on the deck to beat this weekend, Gruul Adventures.
Yeah, Gruul Adventures just continues to show us why it's such a resilient deck. And the big talking point really is how this deck is so flexible in terms of the different ways you can mold it around your needs in terms of what you want it to do. And that is something that we're seeing in this game. This deck that is an aggressive deck has just been able to keep up with so much card advantage from the Loris Rogues deck. 2 copies of Into the Story has resolved this game, and yet somehow Gruul Adventures is the one that's ahead on cards. And I think that's just something that is really rare to see in an aggressive deck.
Yeah, it's so incredibly powerful. Just, pressure on the battlefield, pressure in hand, and just ways to close out the game so incredibly quickly. Shadowskull smashing, hanging out in hand. They're waiting to strike, get these blockers out the way, but there is a Drown in the Lock ready and waiting for such a thing. Won't be able to move both of them out the way, though. Oh, no, actually would be able to with the mana coming from the Great Henge as well. But just swinging in here with the 2 5/5s that are able to attack, Edgewall Innkeeper being killed, means that Lovestruck Beast can no longer. And we'll see the Thieves Guild Enforcer jump in the way of the Kazandu Mammoth.
Yeah, this is... It's such a tough position for Frederico Bastos. You have so few resources left for you, and you have to answer so many things. If you take the damage from this Oxyvagonus and go to 1, you've got a different problem. If you remove the Oxyvagonus, well, it's likely that Leverato is just going to play the other Oxyvagonus from hand and from the graveyard, and it's just, no matter what path Frederico is taking this game, it feels like the door is closing and he's going to be left on the other side of it here.
For sure. As we see Drown in the Lock fired off on this Oxyvagonus, But we do know that there is another one in the graveyard ready to jump out. Won't be able to get both out, but yeah, things are not looking very good here for Frederico Bastos, as now we are able to kill one of these creatures with the Shadow Skull smashing. Actually, both of them for 6 max value. Get out of the way, says Matthias Leverato, and Frederico says, not yet, just you wait. I'm still busy, thank you very much. Lol Mage's domination.
Ailey, Cling to the Dust is massive. He just found the answer for both Ox of Agonis, and Matthias, a bit too patient there, going for Shatter Skull smashing instead of escaping an Ox of Agonis in a position where he looks so favored. He's now losing both of his escape creatures. Yes, the Great Henge is still in play. Yes, if he draws any creature, he's able to start the card advantage chain going. But
oh my goodness.
As it stands, Matthias can't attack. He doesn't have anything now.
Oh my goodness me. What a turn of events there. If we just escaped that oxen, Matthias is probably thinking to himself, kicking himself at this point, and you could see Frederico's joy at what is on top of his library. It is the Agadeem's Awakening. So we're going to be able to draw so many cards, or get so many cards back from the graveyard for Frederico. And all of a sudden, he is like, yes, please, let's go. What can we find off the top? It's a Shadow Skull smashing courtesy of a Rimrock Knight, but that is not enough to get this game over and done with. Agadeem's Awakening, what can you do? There is plenty to pick from in this graveyard.
You can do everything. Frederico had written off this game. You could see it from his facial expression, from his bodily actions, and now he has a new lease on life. This is the mill plan that I was talking about earlier that didn't look realistic is now absolutely the most likely outcome of this game, because all of these creatures are coming back. We're going to get 4 mill from the Thieves Guild Enforcer. Luris will let us play another rogue from our graveyard, continue the mill, and Matthias has lost the only tool he had that was really powerful in the matchup in the 2 copies of Ox of Agonis.
Oh man. If only, Matthias is thinking, if only I had gotten that ox back out of the graveyard, waited for the Shadow Skull smashing to remove whatever blockers were in the way. And now he's left with just the 2 cards in the battlefield. And I hope and a prayer to draw something that's not going to get milled away here by this. And we have another Into the Story as well. Oh my goodness me.
Yeah, there's no longer a shortage of cards for Frederico Bastos.
Oh, this is kind of just like rubbing salt in the wounds here. So another Ox of Agonis off the top of the library. Sure, you can start digging, but now just look at this battlefield. Luris is active. Shadow Skull smashing can get some of these creatures off the battlefield, but this is not looking good here for Matthias Leverato, who you would have assumed had all but won this matchup.
Yeah, you can see on his face that there's this feeling of deflation now. Just a game that was so much in his favor, everything was going right, has suddenly turned completely around. And now, even if he casts this Ox of Agonis, because Frederico Bastos is at 12 life, thanks to the 6 he gained by exiling those 2 copies of Ox of Agonis, it's possible that Leverato is not actually able to close out this game before Bastos just mills him.
Yeah, and that's the big problem here, the big issue, why Matthias is taking so long to think about this next play, because also now, with a Great Henge down, playing the Ox results in an extra card being drawn. So he's got to be managing his library size, as well as he's now this imposing threat on the other side of the battlefield in these rogues.
Yeah, and Leverato doesn't actually have 4 red mana, so he's not even able to cast both Shadow Skull Smashing and Ox of Agonis, and he's thinking to himself, can I actually afford to let Luris remain on the battlefield for another turn? And I don't think the answer is yes. I think Leverato needs to remove this Luris and Soaring Thought Thief and hope that's enough. But with that 4th copy of Into the Story in Bastos' hand, I don't know if it actually will be. I think as long as Bastos doesn't hit something like 5 lands in the next 5 draws, this game is still very much in his favor.
Yeah. Rimrock Knight swinging in, can't block, so might as well apply some pressure where it can. Thieves Guild Enforcer jumping in the way quite happily. And on the end step, let's see what this Into the Story can find. One more time with feeling. 3 creatures in a land.
Crap. That's 7 cards milled right there.
Oh my goodness me, oh my.
I wish we had a count on Matthias's graveyard or library size because it can't be that much. And this is Bastos going for potentially the kill. He's playing everything so quickly. I think he may have already done the math on this where we
he's not
don't
even
have
checking.
access to one.
There it is.
That's
there it is.
That's an
That's
empty
it.
library. Holy.
That's gonna be it. What a matchup there. What a comeback.